So the previous example, 276, was a little gross. We used a couple of dirty tricks to be able to enter in those values, right? We simply had kind of a spaced out C in statement where I was C-inning, which is a word now because I've just used it, when I was C-inning the individual elements of the array simply by using their subscript, right? So I would say C in and then hours sub 0, C in hours sub 1, C in hours sub 2. That, on the other, it works. I'll tell you it works, but it's a little inelegant. It is essentially using an array in the exact same way we used separate variables when we were coding through previous chapters up to chapter 6. So it's the very same thing when you were doing your the star search challenge problem, where you were getting in from the user the scores from the judges. There was no elegant way to be able to do that. You essentially had to ask score for judge 1, get judge 1 score, score for judge 2, get judge 2 score. We're doing the same thing in the previous example as we were doing back in chapter 5, so we may as well not have even had the array at all. Here on page 386, we see we can use a for loop to be able to iterate, so go from element to element to element in the array. So we can iterate through the array using a for loop. So here we can see that the for declaration statement, and I just want to describe what is happening here. So count equals 0, that's going to map rather nicely to the 0th element in our array, which, remember, is the first element in our array. Array underscore size here represents the size of our array. We'll show you in just a second with the code here how we'd be able to actually access that with code during runtime. Every array knows its own size, how many elements are in the array. So that way we don't, keep iterating past the end, the last value there in our array. And then count plus plus, what that's going to enable us to do is use that count to refer to the individual elements of my array as I go traversing through. So to see that in code, this is the 7-2. Remember, we will see code samples after all of this, so you'll get to see this in live code. We have our int hours array that's declared on line number 9 here behind me. So int hours, and then inside of the brackets, number of elements. That is a constant that we have set to 6. It's the same thing as being able to put a 6 in there. We're just hard coding it for us. So the loop happens here on lines 13 through 18. So the reason here that we were using the constant int number of employees was because I can use that to help iterate through my array. So on line number 13, you can see count equals 0. Count is less than number of employees. I could have used 6 there. I also could have used the name of my array dot, and we'll see the dot for that. Let's save that for another day here. We'll see being able to actually use the array length for that. It's just the name of the array dot length and then in parens. And then count plus plus, that, remember, is going to help us iterate through our array, the elements rather, in our array. So on line number 17, I'm going to get, with the CIN statement, the hours at my subscript is going to be count. So that's inside of the brackets. This turns out to be really elegant, right? Because the first time I go through my for loop, my count is at 0. That's going to allow me to store the value in the 0 element of my array. As I increment the count, that's going to increment the element of the array that I'm going to access. So this little for loop essentially takes care of however many lines of code it was you would have needed for, in the star search example, how many, or which judge and what their score was. You can handle that right here with a simple for loop. So that's reading those in to the array. Reading out from the array is this very next portion of the code here. Starting on line number 22, the looping mechanism here looks exactly the same. We are resetting, we're initializing again our count to 0, count less than number of employees, or yeah, number of employees, and then count plus plus. That helps us iterate through the elements in our array. And this time we're just going to output the hours, so that's the name of our array, and then inside of the brackets our count. That count, remember, starts at 0. That maps to our 0th element, the first element in our array. The next count through, that maps to the first, or element number 1 actually, which is the second element in our array. And because it's less than number of employees on the count that looks like number 5, that's really our number 6 iteration, we have populated our array, or in this case we have read out the data from our populated array, and we don't have to go line by line by line like we saw in the 7-1 examples by having to access those individual array elements. We can use looping structures to do that for us.